Welcome back to App Stories. This episode is brought to you by Collide, SetApp, and SourceGraph. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is Mac Stories Editor-in-Chief, Federico Viticci. How's it going, Federico?
I'm doing fantastic, John. How are you?
I'm doing really well. I'm still thinking about all the Southern food you and I talked about on our Club Mac Stories podcast, Mac Stories Unplugged, about 2 weeks ago. And having just moved to North Carolina, I've been sampling all these things. And one of the things we talked about in that episode was okra. And the other night, I had some fried okra, and it was quite good. So I don't really know how to explain to you what it tastes like. It's maybe a little bit of a spicy vegetable.
If you're not aware of what Mac Stories Unplugged is, we can probably leave a link in the show notes. It's sort of the catch-all, behind-the-scenes podcast that John and I do for Club Mac Stories members. And the topics of this show vary wildly.
Yes, they do.
Episodes. But they tend to skew, I think, a trend of Unplugged is me quizzing John about American culture and geography and all kinds of American things. And sometimes we also talk about video games or music or just, what's actually going on behind the scenes of Mac Stories. But me being curious about American culture is definitely one of the core themes of the show.
Yes, and me as a person who grew up and lived in the Midwest most of my life, explaining to Federico, who lives in Italy, all about Southern food is kind of a recipe for for a funny show. So that was a fun one. Well, Federico, today we should talk about how iOS 16 and iPadOS 16 are affecting, I guess, our daily lives, both kind of on a personal level and on a work level. What are some of these new features that are coming this fall? How have they changed the way we work, think about our devices, and I don't know, just kind of live our lives? What do you think?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this is a fun idea for a show because it's not necessarily an overview or a review. It's just what's the everyday consequence? Like what's the result of very specific features from iOS and iPadOS. And I still don't have Ventura installed on my MacBook Pro, but that's one of the things I want to do this weekend, probably via Virtual Buddy, the app by Guy Rambo. I think that's what I'm going to do. Mm-hmm. So yes, I think we should start with iPadOS.
Yeah, I would like to talk about that because that's something that I've been using alongside macOS Ventura. And I wrote about this for Club Mac Stories very recently. And I've kind of gone on this stage manager journey, which was when I first installed iPadOS 16, I thought to myself, well, you know what? This has the external display support. So what I'm going to do is try to come up with a setup where I can kind of easily switch my studio display between my Mac that's sitting on my desk and my iPad. And I very quickly decided that wasn't such a great setup because it involves plugging and unplugging cables. And you have to have a keyboard kind of available for both. And the Apple keyboards aren't made to switch quickly and easily between different devices. And it very quickly became something that was possible, but maybe a little cluttered and messy on my desk. And that's one thing. I don't have a ton of space, and I really don't want a lot of extra gear on my desk that I'm not using all the time. So what I gravitated to from that very quickly was a setup where my iPad Pro, 12.9-inch iPad Pro, is sitting in the 12 South Hoverbar Duo. So it's suspended kind of above my desk next to the studio display. And what I had been doing up until this point, before the betas came out, is that I had kept my iPad in that configuration and had a page of all widgets. So, I could see the weather, I could easily access save timers and timeries, see some of my tasks, my calendar, that sort of thing. Just glanceable type of information that related to whatever I was doing throughout the day as I sat at my desk. And what I realized with Stage Manager on the iPad is that I could kind of take that to a new level by putting the iPad Pro in Stage Manager mode and having it in the same configuration, because it really allows me to do two things. If I'm not using an app on my iPad, I can click on an empty space and it goes right back to the home screen on the iPad. And those widgets that I had already set up and were filling that display are there. So I still have that setup available to me. But if I want to use apps, I can create 2 or 3 different sets of things that I'm working on through the day and have them right there next to the studio display, and then use universal control to move back and forth between the Mac that's driving the studio display and the iPad Pro. And I've really liked that because it's given me, studio display, not studio displays, Stage Manager works closely enough between the two. They work the same way, essentially. It feels like a seamless version of the same thing. And for apps that I want to keep an eye on, but I'm not interacting with as much as I might be on my Mac, because the Mac may usually, with the studio display, I've got the Mac right here. I'm probably focused on something that's on my Mac, and the iPad is off to the side. But it's nice to have, Discord or Slack or Messages or Calendar, those kind of apps over there where I can get to them really easily, and Timer, things like that. Utilities, basically, and messaging apps is what I've been using the most. And it's a really neat setup. I mean, it's kind of slowly evolved the way I work when I'm sitting at my desk.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting setup, and it's very different from mine, where I'm trying to work with the iPad Pro primarily, again, and especially because I want to test iPadOS 16 and I want to really try Stage Manager. And obviously, Stage Manager is changing how I use the iPad. And I've said it before, I'm very torn on Stage Manager at the moment, because overall, I think it's a good system. I think it's a good idea, and I like it. And I obviously like how it's enabling me to get more things done with fewer interactions, right? Because I can see 4 apps on screen at the same time, because I like that I don't have to precisely and carefully resize windows like in traditional macOS multitasking. And I like the external display integration. And I like how I can quickly switch between recently used workspaces with the tray on the left side, with the strip on the left side of the screen.
Right.
But my problem is that Stage Manager by beta 4, developer beta 4, it's still so buggy and it's getting worse. And that's my problem. I was okay with these bugs existing in the first couple of betas, and I was getting concerned in beta 3. And now in beta 4, I'm seriously concerned. And so it doesn't shock me that we just heard a few days ago that, according to Mark Gurman, Apple seems to have decided internally to postpone the release of iPadOS 16 and to delay it by a month. So it's likely not coming out alongside iOS 16, likely in mid-September, but it's potentially coming out in mid-October. So my problem right now is that I want to love Stage Manager, but all these bugs, and there's bugs, but there's also inconsistent design issues and hidden gestures that overall, and I shared a couple of tweets a few days ago about this, and Steve Troughton-Smith has also been tweeting about this very problem. There's a ton of hidden UI material that if you accidentally click the wrong area of the screen or perform the wrong gesture, causes Stage Manager to disrupt your workspace or to exit out of the set of apps that you're using. And the overall feeling is that the entire system feels very finicky and very frail, for lack of a better term. This is especially true when using an external display where the current integration is so unreliable. Like even the fact that if you click on an icon in the dock, and sometimes that window opens on the iPad and other times opens on the external display. Or sometimes, like this is the, we can call it maybe the sometimes problem of Stage Manager, the quote-unquote sometimes problem. Because sometimes a certain feature happens in a way, and sometimes it happens another way. Like sometimes an app gets minimized into the dock, and sometimes it gets minimized into the strip on the left. Sometimes when you open the app switcher, you see all windows from the workspace And sometimes you don't see all windows because the thumbnail of a window is covering the other. So I guess the main problem is the inconsistency of Stage Manager right now, which I hope is the reason why Apple decided to delay this feature, because I almost get the impression that there were too many people trying to make decisions for Stage Manager, maybe too many different teams pulling in different directions. And I feel like it needs more time for an overall assessment of the technical performance for sure, and the bugs and the glitches, but even from a design perspective. And so that's where I am right now. I am using Stage Manager. I'm using it, but I'm complaining as I go because it's enabling me to do more, like having Obsidian and the App Store and Safari and Trello open in the same workspace and, jumping very quickly between those apps, which is what I can now do when I'm assembling Mac Stories Weekly. That's excellent. And having all these new keyboard shortcuts to cycle through windows in the same workspace, that's so well done. And I like it. But the problem is that conceptual advantage of Stage Manager is not necessarily backed up by performance or design consistency right now.
Right. I understand what you're saying there. I mean, I think it really is a conceptual thing that sometimes the overall structure doesn't seem to make sense, which breaks the illusion, I guess, and breaks the experience. But I will say this, it's better on the Mac. So when I have the iPad in tandem with my Mac, those problems are fewer because it's kind of acting as a secondary device. And I haven't been using an external display to the extent that you have, because I experienced those bugs and thought, well, I'm just going to wait till this gets a little better. So I haven't been doing as much with that. What I think has made this setup work for me overall, though, is that before I had my iPad sitting there with a screen of widgets that I could look at. And if I wanted to use apps on the iPad, I could, and I did do that. But the ways in which you set up multi-windowing were so different between the two systems that it was just a lot of friction and overhead whenever I wanted to switch from one system to the other, because I was dealing with split views and slide overs and all that kind of thing when I was on the iPad, which are fine. And I don't mind that UI paradigm, but having the same Stage Manager setup on both devices in a way where it works roughly the same makes it a lot less, it makes it almost frictionless. It makes it much easier to move from one to the other. I think that if Apple can get these bugs out of the way and clean up the design, I think it's there's a lot of potential there, especially in mixed environments like this.
Yeah. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens with Stage Manager. But like I said, I'm using it on the iPad Pro, which is my main computer, and I like it. But it should get better. So it's going to be an interesting couple of months at this point. If iPadOS is going to go through a 4-month development period, at least in the public, instead of a 3-month period, I'm optimistic that we'll get there in October, but not yet.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Collide. Collide is the endpoint security solution that uses the most powerful, untapped resource in all of IT, its end users. Old school device management tools like MDMs force disruptive agents onto employees' devices that slow performance and treat privacy as an afterthought. Collide does things differently. Instead of forcing change on users, Collide notifies your team via Slack when their devices are insecure and gives them step-by-step instructions on how to solve problems. By reaching out to employees with a friendly Slack message and educating them about the company's policies, Collide can help you build a culture in which everyone contributes to security because everyone understands how and why it's important to do it. For IT admins, Collide provides a single dashboard that lets you monitor the security of your entire fleet of devices, whether they're running on the Mac, Windows, or Linux. That visibility makes it easy to prove compliance to your auditors, customers, and the leadership of your company. You can meet your compliance goals by putting users first. Visit collide.com/appstories to find out how to do that. If you follow that link, they'll hook you up with a goodie bag, including a t-shirt for activating a free trial. That's KOLIDE.com/app stories. Check it out today. Again, that URL is collide.com/app stories. Our thanks to Collide for their support of the show.
Now, iOS 16 is in much better shape, obviously. And clearly, the core feature of iOS 16 is the lock screen customization, which is, the follow-up to iOS 14's home screen customization with widgets. And I kind of want to know from you, John, where you stand at the moment on wallpapers, lock screens, the integration with Focus, because this is also something that is happening this year.
Right.
What's your lock screen setup at the moment?
All right. So right now I'm using the wallpaper that automatically switches from one photograph to another. And I've got all the categories set up, nature, buildings, people, all those. And I kind of like it. I actually set it up just yesterday so that instead of cycling, every hour or whatever, I have it so that I can just tap on the photos and move from one to the other. It's kind of a nice way to cycle through your favorite photos. And in terms of the widgets, below the time, I've got parcel because I've got some upcoming deliveries coming to the house. I've got the temperature. And I've got the time in Rome. So I used to have the time in Rome above my time, but what I moved up there is my overall timer. It's just for the current timer that I've got running. And I really put that up there more than anything else as a reminder of the fact that I have a timer running because, I've created a shortcut to deal with long timers that keep running for a long time. But it is pretty nice since usually when I stop working on something, I get up and I'm off to do something else. Maybe I'm leaving the house to run an errand. And at some point during that process, I'm looking at my phone and I'll see that the timer widget is still running and it makes it really easy to open it up and stop it. That's kind of what the widgets look like. I do have a bunch of these wallpapers set up though, and I have different ones that I've used for different purposes. I really like the gradients a lot. The weather one I use once in a while. That's kind of neat. But the photos ones are the ones that I've really, I guess, kind of settled on the most, where I can rotate through a bunch of photos, whether it's people or buildings or whatever it happens to be.
Interesting. Okay. So I'm very much experimenting with all these different lock screen modes at the moment.
Uh-huh.
And so far, I think what's going to happen is going to have 3 lock screens. At least that's the sort of the angle that I'm trying here. So first of all, once again, I have after wiping all the focus modes that I created last year, because I feel like I kind of overdid it with all those, specific focus modes for writing and editing and reading and playing games or listening to music. Like,
right.
I wiped them all, and I'm trying to be more intentional about those focus modes and more practical. So the first focus mode that I recreated is a custom sleep mode. I called it bedtime. It's not the built-in sleep mode because I don't want to use Apple's own sleep tracking feature. I just wanted to have a custom do not disturb mode for when I go to bed. So I created a custom bedtime focus mode. I gave it a very plain dark gray wallpaper with a nice gradient on both the lock screen and the home screen, which is something now you can do very easily. You can, I really like the integration of when you set a lock screen wallpaper, you can also tweak the home screen one to create a pair. That's very nicely done. Mm-hmm. So I created a custom focus mode where one of the nice things I appreciate in Focusing 16 is it's more easy than before to say either allow notifications from these people and apps or silence all notifications from these people and apps. Like it's so much nicer to get started with this system because you effectively have an allow and deny list, which wasn't the case before. So it's much easier to get started. So when I go to sleep, I said, okay, I just want to get notifications from my mom, Sylvia, and I don't know, there was like another emergency number, or something. And I also want to get phone calls just from those people and maybe like alerts from the heart rate app on the watch and the home app. And the idea being, if I'm not sleeping at home, but something happens, I want to make sure that I get notified. And I also enable time-sensitive notifications so that if there's an important notification that's supposed to come through, that does come through. And so I created this focus mode and I gave it a schedule-based activation. So it activates from 2 a.m. to 10 a.m. So that's usually when I go to bed, when I go to sleep. Then I created, in addition to the focus mode, I linked the focus to a lock screen. So now I have a specific lock screen for when I go to sleep, which I see automatically when I enable the bedtime mode. And this lock screen has just 3 widgets. One for the current battery of the Apple Watch. The idea being I can see if the Apple Watch is charged, before I go to sleep. One that shows me the alarm that I've set for the morning. And if it's not set, it says off, so that I can make sure that I set it from the lock screen. And the other will show when the sun will rise. So that's a useful information to have if I'm trying to be, I'm trying to act like a young guy and pulling an all-nighter to play with my PlayStation. I want to make sure that I go to sleep before the sun rises. So that's a useful data point to have. And then at 10 a.m., the focus mode is automatically disengaged and the lock screen goes back to the regular one. Now, for the regular lock screen, what I'm thinking I'm going to do is I will use the lock screen I described in App Stories Plus. So if you're not a member, go listen to that segment where I described sort of this approach that I'm taking right now, that I'm considering for sort of a mixed layout for a work lock screen. So that I think I will use for the work focus mode. And then I think what I will do is I will set up a photo shuffle lock screen with pictures of Zelda and Ginger and Sylvia, and use that as my personal lock screen. So my idea is when I'm specifically, like when I'm saying, okay, I'm going to my room and I'm gonna get some work done, that's the lock screen I want to see. So when I'm writing stories or recording podcasts, editing articles, taking screenshots, that's the lock screen I want to see. But when I'm not doing that, basically, I want to see a personal lock screen with beautiful pictures of my dogs and girlfriend. Mm-hmm. That's the idea. But the only asterisk right now for me is I don't have a work focus mode yet. And I want to understand what that's supposed to mean. Is it just for switching lock screens? Is there something I could hide when I'm in work focus mode? Because as I mentioned, I don't want to overdo it like I did last year.
Yeah, I
but
understand
maybe there's a few subtle tweaks. Like maybe when I'm in the work focus mode, I don't know, maybe I could hide the YouTube icon from the home screen. I'm trying to be very realistic about it, though, very pragmatic. I don't want to be all like, oh, I have 15 different focus modes on my iPhone and then I never use them. So I want to be more judicious and intentional. But that work focus, I still don't have.
I understand where you're coming from with focus modes because I've kind of abandoned focus modes largely. I've got a bunch of them and I should just probably delete them all and start over and fresh like you did. I find that if I really need a distraction-free part of my day because I'm extra busy or whatever it happens to be and need to focus, I just put on Do Not Disturb. And then things don't get through. And maybe I have a few exceptions to that of who can get through to me. And having something that's different for all the different parts of my day or different things that I do throughout my day hasn't really stuck very well for me. I do like your idea of the bedtime one that has things that are very specific to alarms that you've set, when the sun's going to rise, and that sort of thing. I like that a lot. But I haven't yet tied any of my focus modes and wallpapers, or lock screen widget setups together yet. So I'm kind of waiting on that. I'm not sure that it's going to be for me. I think that's okay. I mean, there's features in all these phones and that don't really necessarily address everyone's the way everyone is. But I would like to experiment with something. I use the Apple Sleep Focus Mode because I do use Apple Sleep Tracking. I know that you kind of did it for a while and stopped doing it. I don't know that I don't really pay much attention to it though. I really just have it. So I do have an alarm that wakes me up in the morning most days, and it tracks, I guess, when I'm in bed. I don't even pay attention much to what it does, but I do like how it dims the screen and things at night I'm in that sleep focus mode. But it doesn't necessarily mean I am asleep, because that sleep focus mode typically turns on before I'm actually asleep, and I'm usually just reading or something. But it does quiet down the phone, which is a good thing. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think right now I've got probably 6 or 7 of these different lock screen setups. I'll probably settle on 2 or 3 at the end of the day. I'm not sure whether the focus modes are going to be part of that, but I have really enjoyed just the ability to not only have those widgets there for glanceable information, like what, I can see right now that it's 77 degrees outside and what it's supposed to go up to today. I know what time it is in Rome, and I've got a package coming today. But I really like, too, the way the notifications work, because I really appreciate not having the notifications in my face. I have just the number at the bottom. That's perfect for me. I don't need to see those. I tend to ignore my notifications, the ones I get anyway. And now they're down there. And if I want to take a quick look, I can see what's come in the last, hour or whatever it's been since I last looked. But it makes it a little more clutter free and lets me enjoy the photos that I've got on my lock screen.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. We'll see. I think I think I'm gonna do it with the work focus, but I need to I'm the kind of person that and you and I, we talk about this stuff, right? One of the advantages of doing what we do for a living is the flexibility in our lives. And so I don't want to be the person who says, oh, now I'm in work focus mode, I'm not going to get text messages from my mom.
Right.
On one hand, yes, because I'm working. But on the other, the reason why I love my job is that I can be flexible. And so if my mom asks me for something, I can be flexible enough to reply. And there's that tension of, I guess if I worked in an office and, I had a regular job, I could do that kind of stuff where I'm off limits for, 7 hours a day or something.
Right.
But should I do that given what I do? It doesn't necessarily make sense to be that aggressive.
I not only does it not make sense, it just, I think, is harder given the way that we work, because we don't have hard boundaries really, and that's both an advantage and I guess in some respects at times a disadvantage. But we do have the freedom to go out in the middle of the day and run a couple of errands that not everybody has, which I appreciate having. But as a result, do I really want to be? Yeah,
do you want to have all these filters? I don't know.
Right.
That's my problem. So I'm trying to be very, like I said, judicious. Okay, so maybe the YouTube icon is not a good idea when I'm working.
Yeah.
But here and there, small tweaks, not just, nobody's going to get in touch with me now. It seems unnecessary for me.
For me as well. I mean, I think I've gotten pretty good at when I've got something to do and someone's texting me, I'm pretty good at ignoring things if I have to.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if I don't, I'll deal with it. But yes, I'm kind of the same way as you on that one.
So if anything, the last thing I will say is, and maybe it seems quite silly, but for me personally, it's almost as if the focus system. Let me see if I can put this in words effectively. It's almost as if focus is more useful as a way to switch layouts.
Yes, that's why it shouldn't be called focus mode.
Yes, more than a way to actually focus and silence notifications. It's more of a layout and customization tool for me than an actual focus system.
Right.
Does that make sense?
No, it does, because you could have your gaming focus, and it's not that you necessarily want to have certain notifications not come through when you're gaming. I mean, I guess you don't want notifications interrupting the screen when you're playing a game, but you might want to have a home screen with nothing but the games that you're currently playing, which makes a lot of sense, right? But I can see it in that way as being more useful. And that's the kind of thing I've tried to set up in the past, but I also don't find myself resorting to those very often. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by SetApp. Getting things done is a challenge that everyone struggles with. One way to tackle it is to make sure you have the right tools for your computer, and that means having the right apps. A great way to discover new quality apps and to get all the tools you need to get your work done is SetApp, a subscription for Mac and iPhone apps. SetApp packs over 240 high-quality apps into one. Whether you need to develop, design, or create, there's an app for almost any task, so you don't need to look in tons of places to find what you need. With SetApp, you can think about your tasks, not your apps. I've been following SetApp since it first started years ago now, and the catalog is really high quality. Some of the very best apps that I use myself every day are included with SetApp, and it's a large collection, but it's a quality collection. I think that that's what really sets it apart from other options, is that you don't really have to go hunting because everything you want is here. And for most categories, there's multiple options, so you can find the app that fits your needs the best. SetApp has a dedicated curation team that only selects the highest quality apps. Plus, instead of paying thousands of dollars for separate app licenses, there's just one flat monthly fee. New apps are added to SetApp regularly, updates are free, and the apps are all full-featured pro versions. Until September 15th, use the code AppStories to get a 1-month free trial. That's a terrific deal, so make sure you take advantage of it today. Head on over to setapp.com and redeem your code. That's SETAPP.com with the code AppStories to get 1 month free. Our thanks to SetApp for their support of the show. Federico, another thing that I've noticed with the addition of the lock screen widgets is that it's caused me to rethink my widgets on my home screen as well. Yes, as well as the complications on my Apple Watch. Now, I think it's made the biggest difference with how I focus on my Apple Watch, because I thought about it and I was like, well, in what circumstances do I want to see information about, say, the weather or what time it is somewhere? Like I have the widget on my lock screen for Rome. Where should that be? Should it be on my watch where I have to raise my wrist to see? Or should it be on my lock screen? And I actually, in a lot of ways, since my iPhone is always just sitting there right next to me, tapping on the screen is almost easier, I think, in a lot of circumstances than resorting to the Apple Watch, raising your wrist and taking a look. And so what I tried to do is customize those devices a little more towards what they're used for. So, for instance, what I mean by that is with the Apple Watch, I've really focused on a couple of different things. One is it's got complications. I'm using the infograph modular, so I've got a lot of potential complications here. But right now, I do have the weather, the temperature, both on the lock screen of my iPhone and on my watch, because that's something that I check more often than other things. And it's nice to have it in both places, but that's the only one that's in both places. The rest of the things on my watch are the workouts app, so I can start a walk, the activity rings, so I can see how far I am on that. And then the big one in the center is now playing, for when I'm out and about walking and I want to see what's there and quickly access it. And the music app up in the upper left corner, so I can get music quickly. Those are things I use a lot when I go out for a run or for a walk or whatever it happens to be. So most of these are related to exercising, other than the weather one. And then what I've done is I've rethought a little bit of how I'm using my home screen widgets, because now that I've got things like the weather and other things in multiple places, both on my watch and on the lock screen widgets, I've changed what I'm doing on the iPhone's home screen so that I have more detail in those. And so I'm kind of at the point where I'm using two home screens. The first one has a medium-sized widget at the top, and the second one has a medium-sized widget right in the center of the screen. And the top one on the first screen is reserved for things like timery, so I can see what my current running timer is and get into that app really quickly. I've also got the new app Zones by Vidit Bhargava that has both Cork, Ireland, where my son Finn lives, and Rome there too, which is, I've got that on the lock screen, but if I'm working on the phone and trying to organize maybe a call between the two of us, I can see exactly what time it is in Rome very easily. Got my calendar. I've also got things like VIPs from my mail app. So I've got a little list with just the top 2 VIP emails that I've gotten so I don't miss an important email. That kind of thing. I guess reminders as well. So that there's a little more information and space available there. It works much better to me than a lock screen widget when you've got more text involved. And then that stack on the second, I guess that I should have mentioned, that's a stack at the top of the screen on the first home screen. And then on the second screen, there's a stack right in the middle, which is more related to entertainment. Things like music, Marvis, Pro, as well as the Play app and some entertainment news from the News app. And I have that in the center mainly because the top half of that screen is overflow from the first screen, apps that I still want to have quick access to without searching for, but that don't fit on the first home screen. And then below that are the games that I'm currently playing on iOS, which is a nice kind of convenient place to put those. That's about it in terms, but it has really changed things because it's given me, I've decided to put more widgets in these medium stacks. And I'm also trying to make better use of the Today view as well. When you swipe over, from the home screen, swipe right, and you go to that screen where I've got a couple of large widgets as well as 2 of the small ones for things like the battery of my devices, a month view calendar, as well as more weather detail and that sort of thing.
Very nice, very nice. I still haven't had the time to rethink my home screen layout, but that's up next on my list, I guess. Especially for the work focus. Something I noticed, by the way, that before I forget to mention this, I have noticed in one of Apple's marketing images on Apple.com, a black shortcuts widget that I don't think that exists yet. So the shortcuts widget has a translucent background. And even if you switch to dark mode, that becomes like a dark gray translucent background.
Yep.
There's a screenshot on Apple.com. It's probably a Photoshop error or something. It's showing a home screen in light mode because the calendar widget is white, but a shortcuts widget, a medium-sized rectangle with 4 shortcuts and a black background. And that's, I don't know, that the widget doesn't exist. So
very interesting. Yeah, I haven't changed my home screens a lot, but I have really moved towards focusing on things where there's more information that I can display because there's more room, obviously. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by SourceGraph. So you've hired a brilliant developer. That's great, but now you have to get them onboarded. If your company is growing, onboarding new developers is something that you're going to have to do a lot, and it's a big undertaking every single time. One of the biggest challenges to new hires is to get up to speed with the projects their new teams are working on. This can be tricky if code bases that your developers are working on are already large. Thankfully, SourceGraph makes it easy to move fast, even in those big code bases. Developers know that knowledge is most useful when it's findable. Centralization helps, but given the fact that most companies store their knowledge in multiple places, how do you make that information accessible to those who need it? As a code intelligence platform, SourceGraph gives developers what they need to drive their learning over time and in different situations. Teams that don't use SourceGraph need to rely on asking colleagues or reviewing out-of-date documentation, which is cumbersome and time-consuming. But with SourceGraph, every developer can search across millions of repositories and find specific code, saving time for themselves and everyone else. So when questions do come up, you know it's the big stuff worthy of the extra time. SourceGraph was created to make developers' lives easier, and today they work with leading companies across every industry, including 3 out of 5 of the top tech companies, plus PayPal, Uber, Plaid, GE, Reddit, and Atlassian. Visit about.sourcegraph.com today to learn more. That's about.sourcegraph.com to find out why some of the biggest tech companies in the world use SourceGraph and to see what it can do for yours. Or just click the link in the show notes to let them know that you heard about them from us. Our thanks to SourceGraph for their support of the show.
All right. So one of the things that is affecting in some form or another my life right now is the new integration with Safari in Shortcuts. I guess the deeper integration between Safari and Shortcuts. Specifically, there's a few new actions that I've been building shortcuts for that I've been using for the past week. The first one is called Open View. Open View is a new action in Shortcuts that allows you to launch a specific view of Safari directly. Now, obviously, as I mentioned before, I've been using this to open reading lists directly. Finally, we have a proper way to open reading lists directly from Shortcuts. The other actions that exist in Shortcuts for iOS and iPadOS 16 for Safari are also about tab groups and finding items, either in a tab group or in reading list. So, for filtering reading lists, something that I'm playing around with is first a shortcut to open a random story. So just get the items from a reading list and give me a random article that I want to read. And the other is a way to filter reading list items by topic. So you could assemble a list of keywords like Apple, Nintendo, PlayStation, I don't know, football, Joe Biden or something. And then you could filter your reading list items. And if that keyword is contained in the title, you could choose from those stories that contain that keyword. Basically, it's like a tagging mode, like choosing from topics in your reading list. That's one of the things that Shortcuts lets you do. Also, what I'm thinking about doing, I've been doing this for the past 3 days, so it's relatively early. But what I'm doing is, this is something that I think you mentioned a while back, maybe, John. You know those links that you come across on a daily basis that are interesting, but are not links for reading later? Maybe will be links that you want to check out because it's something you want to buy, or maybe it's something that we will cover on Mac Stories. Like you're not sure yet. You just want to stash them somewhere. And I think what you do is you save them in good links.
Yep.
What I'm doing is I created a tab group just for these links. And so whenever I come across a link that I want to do something with later, I just I tap and hold on the address bar on the iPhone and I say move to tab group, right? So I move them into my links tab group. Then I made a shortcut that makes it easy to reopen this tab group, because that's also something you can do now. You can open a tab group directly. But to make this process even nicer, to make this shortcut even nicer, I actually am using 2 open view actions. The first one opens the tab group. So it switches from my regular tab sets to that specific links tab group.
Right.
Then I added a delay of half a second to make sure that Shortcuts doesn't get confused. And I added a second open view action that shows me the tab overview. This way, when I open the links tab group, it immediately switches to the grid view with the thumbnails of all the open tabs in that group, so that I can see all my links in grid view.
Interesting. That, you know what? That is exactly what I'm doing with the Mac Stories weekly tab group that I've got. I did the exact same thing because it's really nice when you have several tabs to get that grid view to be able to, and then be able to pick from one of them to read it more closely. I like that approach a lot. I mean, that's something I did for the very first time last week for the newsletter, for the Club Mac Stories newsletter, when I had links. I spent the week before saving links into that tab group when it was time to kind of look through them and pick which ones I wanted to actually write about. Because there's usually a few that I at one point or another during the week I thought was a good idea and then decide, this isn't that great. And so I'll go into that overview mode, scan through, and then poke around at each one and start writing about them. And it's been a pretty nice lightweight system for doing that. I've been doing that in the past with good links, but I I think that I'm going to stick with this tab group view for a while and see how that goes.
All right. Anything else you want to mention?
I don't think so. That's about what it's been, how things have changed for me so far.
There's one thing I want to, there's one other, well, actually a couple of things I want to mention, if you'll allow me.
Okay. What's that?
Well, the first one is just, I wanted to say how nice it is to be able to edit iMessages. Right?
Oh, that is nice. Yeah.
That's one of the features of 16. And I tend to, I mean, you do this more than I do, but I also tend to have typos in my messages every once in a while.
Do I do more than you, Federico? I think I am.
I think you do. I think you do.
I don't think I can deny that.
Yeah. It's fine. Look, it's fine. We all do it. And it's, we can always blame autocorrect, but
Yes,
it's nice
of
to be
course.
able to finally properly edit those messages in place instead of having to send the asterisk, with the correction of what you
Yes.
meant. Which is a long time habit that I still need to kick because I still, tend to send
It's
the
true.
asterisk.
I did see you do that with a message you sent to me not long ago
Yeah,
that you
yeah,
could have
yeah.
easily edited. Yeah.
But it's not, I got to remember, now I can actually edit the thing. So that's
Right.
cool. And then I wanted to mention just the unit conversion stuff in 16, like the system-wide unit and currency and, conversion for anything. How you can select any kind of text, whether it contains a dollar amount or a unit of length or temperature, whatever it is. And you will have that system-wide conversion in the copy and paste menu, which I guess is now officially called the edit menu. It's not called the copy and paste menu anymore, but still, you have that system-wide conversion for even time zones, which is incredible. Like whether you're sending that in an iMessage or you're selecting some text in any text field, really, whether it's an email message or a tweet or a note in the Notes app or a web page in Safari, if you select something that can be converted to something else, you will get that conversion right there in the edit menu of iOS. And sometimes those things are even tappable, so you can tap the value and you will get a pop-up with the conversion. So that stuff, that whole system that is even integrated with live text now, because these conversions even work in live text, like all that intelligent stuff is incredible. And it's one of my favorite details of 16 because it makes it so easy for me to now convert. Like when you say it's in the mid 80s today, and it's, I don't even know what that means in Fahrenheit, but I have a nice way to convert that back to Celsius. That's so well done.
Oh, that's my favorite feature is just the temperature alone. Just I can complain to you that it's 100 degrees here, and you know that's, I don't know, 36 Celsius or whatever it is. It's pretty nice. It's pretty nice.
Yeah.
All right, Federico. Well, that's a great episode. I think we'll probably by this fall have changed our home screens and our lock screens and our focus modes another 3 times, but we'll update everybody about that when it happens and maybe do another episode similar to this later in the fall. I want to thank our 3 sponsors again. That's Collide, Setapp, and SourceGraph. You can find me and Federico over at macstories.net. Federico is at Viticci on Twitter and Instagram. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHWS. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.